The Dakota sun blazed merciless and white over Whitestone Bluff, turning the auction yard into a furnace of human desperation. Calder Royce stood at the crowd's edge, his weathered hands gripping his hat brim until his knuckles showed bone white. The familiar weight of grief pressed against his chest. 3 years since Evelyn's death. 3 years of whispered conversations that died when he entered Murphy's store. 3 years of doors that closed just as he approached. Today felt different. Today the town's cruelty had found a new target. Next item. Sheriff Clayton Bragg's voice cracked like a whip across the wooden platform. His silver badge caught the brutal light as he gestured toward the trembling figure beside him. Chinese girl, maybe 16. Strong constitution, quiet disposition. Ideal for domestic service. The crowd's laughter crawled under Calder's skin like disease. 47 men sunburned, and cruel their voices, a symphony of anticipated violence. The girl stood barefoot on the auction block, her blue dress torn and stained with the journey's brutality. Blood had dried on her split feet, but she held her spine straight as a lodgepole pine. Look at them eyes. Wade Kincaid called from the front, his saloon owner's belly straining against his vest. Got some fire in her still. Might be fun breaking that spirit. More laughter. A man spat tobacco juice at the girl's feet. She didn't flinch. Calder's chest tightened with a memory. Evelyn's voice on their last morning together, her dark eyes fierce with conviction. When good men stand silent, evil writes the law in blood. She'd been heading to town that day, carrying a bundle of food and medicine. For the sick, she'd said. But he'd caught her hiding something, letters, papers, items she'd claimed were none of his concern. 3 hours later, she was dead. Random raid, the sheriff had declared. Could have happened to anyone. $3. Kincaid's voice shattered the memory. $3 for the China doll. 4, shouted another voice. 5. The bidding climbed like a death count. Calder's stomach churned as grown men reduced a human soul to pocket change. The girl's eyes swept the crowd, and for one electric moment they met his. In that gaze he saw something that made his breath catch, not fear, but defiance. Not submission, but fury held in check. $7. Kincaid's voice rose triumphant. $7, and I'll teach her some manners. The crowd roared approval. Sheriff Bragg raised his gavel, smiling like a well-fed wolf. Going once. Calder's mind flashed to Evelyn's funeral. How few had attended. How quickly the town had forgotten her kindness. How easily they'd accepted her death as inevitable, natural, deserved. Going twice. The girl's chin lifted higher. Blood trickled from her lip where someone had struck her, but her eyes blazed with unbroken pride. She would not beg, would not grovel, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her spirit crack. Something broke loose in Calder's chest, 3 years of rage, guilt, and helpless grief crystallizing into action. $10. The words tore from his throat like a war cry. The crowd wheeled toward him, 47 faces twisted with shock and malice. Conversations died. Even the wind seemed to pause. Sheriff Bragg's pale eyes narrowed to slits. Well, Calder Royce. Thought you'd crawled back into your hole and died. $10. Calder repeated, stepping forward. The crowd parted reluctantly, their hostility thick as smoke. Cash money. You carrying $10, hermit. Bragg's smile showed too many teeth. Because bidding without funds is fraud in my jurisdiction. Calder's hand moved to his pocket, already knowing what he'd find. $3.47. Enough for coffee and beans, not enough for revolution. But he'd opened his mouth, and the whole territory was watching. He started, then stopped. The girl on the platform had turned to stare at him, those dark eyes wide with something that might have been hope. Thought so. Bragg's gavel began its descent. $7 to paid in full. The voice came from the crowd's edge, calm and certain. Marshal Emery Langford emerged from the shadows, his federal badge gleaming against his dark coat. Without ceremony, he pressed cold silver coins into Calder's palm, $10 exact. "Count it, Sheriff," Langford said quietly. The crowd erupted in whispers. Federal marshals didn't involve themselves in local auctions. Federal marshals didn't care about Chinese girls or hermit ranchers. But Langford's hand rested easy on his Colt, and his eyes held the kind of certainty that came from too many years of necessary violence. Marshal Bragg said carefully, "This is territorial jurisdiction." "The girl," Langford interrupted. "She's been purchased, legal and proper." Calder stared at the coins burning in his palm. He'd served with Langford in the war, but that was lifetimes ago. They'd barely spoken since Evelyn's death. Why was he here? Why was he helping? Sold to Calder Royce. Bragg's gavel crashed down with finality, but his voice carried the promise of retribution. "Collect your property." The word hit Calder like a physical blow. Property. As if the slight figure walking toward him was livestock machinery, a tool to be owned and used. When she reached him, she stopped just beyond arm's reach. Her eyes met his, directly unflinching. "I ain't your property," she said quietly, her English accented but precise. "I ain't nobody's property." "No." Calder agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You ain't." The crowd began to disperse, but their eyes lingered like brands. Conversations buzzed with speculation and threat. Calder had painted a target on both their backs, and everyone knew it. "Come on," he said softly, not touching her, but indicating the direction. "Let's get you some food." As they walked away from the platform, Calder caught Bragg's eye. The sheriff's smile was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. Something that promised this was far from over. "You made an enemy today," Langford observed, falling into step beside them. "Seems like I already had one." Calder replied, thinking of all the closed doors, all the suspicious glances, all the ways the town had shut him out since Evelyn's death. "Just didn't know it yet." The girl walked between them in silence, her bare feet leaving small prints in the dust. But her head remained high, and for the first time in 3 years, Calder felt something other than grief burning in his chest. It might have been hope. It might have been rage. But it was something, and that was more than he'd felt in longer than he cared to remember. Murphy's General Store sat on Main Street like a fortress of commerce, its windows displaying goods that might as well have been treasure. For all the good, they did the desperate. Calder pushed through the door, and the bell's cheerful chime mocking the tension that followed him like a storm cloud. Behind the counter, Sean Murphy looked up from his ledger, his Irish features hardening the moment he saw Calder's companions. His eyes flicked from Calder to the girl, to Marshal Langford, calculating the implications. "We're closed," Murphy said flatly, despite the obvious signs of business customers browsing shelves, goods displayed on counters, the smell of fresh bread from the back room. "Your sign says open till 6. Calder pointed out, keeping his voice level. "Clock says 4:30. Said we're closed." Murphy's hand drifted toward the shotgun beneath his counter. "To you." The girl, he still didn't know her name, stood quietly beside Calder, but he could feel the tension radiating from her small frame. She was hungry. Hell, they both were. And in a town where spite ran deeper than well water, that hunger was about to become a weapon. "Sean." Calder tried again, using the man's first name deliberately. "I've been trading here 7 years. Never missed a payment, never caused trouble. All I need is flour beans, maybe some jerky." "Things change." Murphy's voice carried the weight of the entire town's judgment. "Some folks make choices that put them outside decent society." "What society?" The words came out harder than Calder intended. The one that turns its back on a man when his wife dies helping others. The one that watches a girl sold like cattle and calls it commerce. That girl ain't our concern. Murphy's eyes flicked to the Chinese girl, then away, as if looking at her might contaminate him. And your wife? She made her own choices. Look where it got her. The words hit Calder like a sucker punch. Evelyn's death had been ruled a random raid, Cheyenne or Lakota, the authorities claimed, though no one ever found proof. But Murphy's tone suggested something else entirely. What do you mean by that? Nothing. Murphy's retreat was too quick, too scared. Just, some folks should mind their own business, live longer that way. Mind their own business. Calder's voice rose. Since when is helping people not your business? Since it starts costing other people money. The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Murphy's face reddened as he realized what he'd revealed. Marshal Langford had been examining ammunition, but now he approached the counter with deliberate calm. Problem here, Murphy. No problem, Marshal. Just explaining to Mr. Royce that some customers ain't welcome. Funny. Langford's voice carried federal authority. Looks like a public establishment to me. Territory law says public establishments serve all law-abiding citizens. That girl might be law-abiding, but she ain't a citizen. She's a person under federal protection. That's enough. Langford placed a box of 45 cartridges on the counter. Ring this up along with whatever supplies Mr. Royce needs. Murphy's face turned purple, but he couldn't refuse a federal marshal. Not openly. $2 for the ammunition. And the supplies. Flour beans jerky. Calder said quickly. Some canned peaches if you have them. $8 total. Highway robbery. The same supplies would have cost $4 last month. But Calder paid without complaint, counting out the coins, while Murphy wrapped the goods with grudging efficiency. As they prepared to leave, the girl spoke for the first time since the auction. Thank you, she said to Calder, her voice soft but clear. For what you did back there. What's your name? Jia Li. It means beautiful prophet. Her mouth twisted with bitter irony. My parents thought it would bring me luck. Some luck, Calder observed. Better than most girls in my situation. She paused, studying his face. Your wife, she helped Chinese people, didn't she? The question caught Calder off guard. How did you know that? The way he looks at you. She nodded toward Murphy, who was pretending not to listen. Angry, but also guilty. Like he knows something he shouldn't. Before Calder could respond, a voice called from across the street. Mr. Royce, wait. They turned to see Margaret Callahan hurrying toward them, her faded brown dress fluttering in the wind. The boarding house keeper was one of the few people in town who still acknowledged Calder's existence. A widow herself, she'd lost her husband in the same war that had nearly killed both Calder and Langford. Mrs. Callahan. Calder touched his hat brim. Afternoon. Don't you afternoon me, Calder Royce? Despite her scolding tone, her eyes were kind. The whole town's buzzing about what you did today. You got somewhere safe to take this child. My ranch is 15 miles north. We'll make it before dark. 15 miles. Mrs. Callahan looked scandalized. With her barefoot and half-starved, absolutely not. She turned to Jia Li, her voice gentling. What's your name, dear? Jolly, ma'am. Well, Jia Li, you'll stay the night at my boarding house. Get a proper meal and a good night's rest. Mrs. Callahan's tone brooked no argument. And you, Calder Royce, will accept my hospitality without debate. Mrs. Callahan, I appreciate the offer, but nothing. I've got 2 empty rooms and a pot of stew that'll feed an army. She paused, her expression growing serious. Besides, you shouldn't be traveling after dark. Not tonight. Why not? Because there's been talk, angry talk, About what you did today, about why you did it. She glanced around nervously. About things that maybe should stay buried. Langford stepped forward. What kind of talk, Mrs. Callahan? The kind that leads to rope and fire if folks work themselves up enough. She looked directly at Calder. They remember what your wife did. And they'll remember this too. What exactly did Evelyn do? Mrs. Callahan's eyes filled with something that might have been regret. She helped people. Chinese people mostly. Girls who'd run away from bad situations. Fed them, hid them, helped them reach places where they could start over. The pieces began falling into place in Calder's mind. The suspicious looks, the closed doors, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. The bundle Evelyn had been carrying that last morning. The raid that killed her wasn't random. Mrs. Callahan's voice was barely a whisper. I've suspected for 3 years, but I could never prove it. Your wife was murdered, Calder. Murdered for doing what was right. The words hit him like a physical blow. For 3 years he'd lived with the guilt of not being there, of failing to protect her. But if she'd been targeted specifically, who? The word came out as a growl. I don't know. But it goes high up, higher than you might think. She looked around again, then gently took Jia Li's arm. Come on, child. Let's get you fed and cleaned up. As they walked toward the boarding house, Calder's mind raced. Everything he'd believed about Evelyn's death was wrong. She hadn't died because he'd failed to protect her. She'd died because she'd chosen to protect others. You thinking what I'm thinking? Langford asked quietly. That this town's got more secrets than a politician's diary. That whoever killed your wife is still here. Still in power. Still watching. Langford's hand rested on his gun butt. And now they're looking at you and that girl the same way they looked at Evelyn. Calder nodded grimly. Then we better be ready for them. But as they climbed the steps to Mrs. Callahan's boarding house, neither man noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Deputy Tom Brennan made mental notes of who was talking to whom, who was offering shelter, who was showing kindness to the Chinese girl. Information that would prove very valuable before the night was through. The boarding house dining room smelled of beef stew and fresh bread, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Mrs. Callahan had set out her best china, a small act of defiance that wasn't lost on anyone present. Jia Li sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around a steaming bowl, while Calder and Langford flanked her like guards. Eat up, dear. Mrs. Callahan encouraged bustling between kitchen and dining room. You need your strength. Jia Li ate with careful precision, but her eyes never stopped moving. She was cataloging everything, the sounds of the town settling into evening, the patterns of footsteps on wooden sidewalks, the way lamplight flickered through windows. This was a girl who'd learned survival the hard way. You're watching the street, Calder observed. Always. She didn't look up from her stew. The ones who stop watching are the ones who disappear. You're safe here. No such thing as safe. Not for people like me. Her voice carried weight beyond her years. Bad men wear badges, good men stay quiet, and girls like me just vanish. Before Calder could respond, the front door's bell chimed. Mrs. Callahan's cheerful greeting died in her throat as heavy footsteps approached the dining room. Sheriff Clayton Bragg filled the doorway, his bulk blocking most of the light from the hallway. Behind him stood Deputy Brennan, hand resting on his gun butt. Evening, folks. Bragg's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Hope I'm not interrupting supper. Sheriff. Mrs. Callahan's voice was carefully neutral. What brings you by official business? Checking on our new arrival. Bragg's eyes fixed on Jia Li, who had stopped eating but kept her gaze on her bowl. Making sure she's settling in proper. She's fine, Calder said flatly. Fed, housed, and free. Free. Bragg's laugh was ugly. That's interesting. Free from what exactly? From whatever she was running from before she ended up on your auction block. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Bragg's smile faded, replaced by something cold and calculating. That wasn't my auction block, Royce. That was a legal sale of indentured servants conducted under territorial law, all proper and above board. Indentured servants have contracts, Langford interjected. They have rights, protections, limits on their service. Marshal. Bragg's tone carried barely concealed hostility. I wasn't aware federal law enforcement had jurisdiction over local business matters. Human trafficking is federal business, Sheriff. Always has been. Trafficking? Bragg's voice rose with manufactured indignation. That's a serious accusation. Hope you got evidence to back it up. I might, given time. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Mrs. Callahan wrung her hands in her apron, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Jia Li continued eating, but Calder could see her shoulders tense. You know, Royce. Bragg said suddenly, his tone conversational. I've been thinking about your purchase today. $10 for a Chinese girl, that's considerable money for a man in your circumstances. My circumstances? Well, you haven't been to town much since your wife died. A lot of folks figured you'd moved on, started over somewhere else. But here you are throwing money around like you struck gold. I paid what was asked. You paid what the marshal here fronted you. Bragg's eyes glittered with malice. Which raises questions about your arrangement with federal law enforcement. Calder felt the trap closing around him. Whatever game Bragg was playing, it was bigger than a simple auction. And what are you getting at, Sheriff? I'm getting at the fact that you bought from me, Royce. And I want you to remember something important. He paused, letting the words sink in. I own this town. I own the people in it. And I own the businesses that keep it running. You don't own me, don't I? Bragg stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over the table. See that girl there? She's got debts. Debts to the people who fed her, housed her, transported her all the way from California. Those debts don't disappear just because you drop $10 on the table. She's not property, Calder said quietly. She's exactly what I say she is. Bragg's voice turned ugly. And I say she's stolen goods with outstanding obligations. Jia Li's spoon clattered against her bowl. She looked up for the first time since Bragg had entered, her dark eyes blazing with something that made the sheriff take a step back. What obligations? She asked quietly. Training costs, transportation fees, room and board. Bragg's smile was predatory. The folks who invested in you expect a return on their investment. What kind of training? The kind that teaches Chinese girls their place in American society. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Mrs. Callahan gasped. Langford's hand moved to his weapon. Calder felt rage building in his chest like a wildfire. You son of a bitch, he breathed. Language, Royce. There's a lady present. Bragg's smile was triumphant. Now I figure you got two choices. Hand over the girl and forget this ever happened, or try to fight territorial law and see how that works out. There's a third choice, Jia Li said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She was standing now, her small frame, somehow filling the room with defiance. I can tell everyone what I know. What you know? Bragg's confidence wavered. About the house with the red door in San Francisco. About the ledger with all the names. About the law officers who got paid to look the other way. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with fury. About the girls who didn't survive the training. Bragg's face went white. You're lying. Am I? You want to take that chance? Sheriff want to find out what a 16-year-old girl remembers when she's got nothing left to lose. The silence stretched like a bowstring. Deputy Brennan's hand tightened on his gun. Mrs. Callahan clutched her apron, her face pale with understanding. You're playing a dangerous game, girl. Bragg said finally. I'm not playing anything. Jia Li sat back down, picked up her spoon, and resumed eating. I'm just remembering. Bragg stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply toward the door. This ain't over, Royce. Not by a long shot. Sheriff Langford called after him. You forgot something. Bragg paused in the doorway. What? The girl's under federal protection now. Interfering with a federal witness is a serious crime. Federal witness to what? Whatever she wants to testify about. Bragg's exit was less dramatic than his entrance. But the threat he left behind hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Callahan sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Lord have mercy, she whispered. What have we gotten ourselves into? A war, Jia Li said simply. A war that's been going on for years. Calder looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the youth to the intelligence beneath. This wasn't just a frightened girl. This was a survivor who'd learned to fight back. What did you see in San Francisco? He asked quietly. Everything. Her voice was hollow. And it's happening here too. Has been for years. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the boarding house windows. In the distance, a dog howled a sound that carried all the loneliness and brutality of the frontier night. They'd crossed a line tonight. All of them. And there would be no going back. The barn behind Mrs. Callahan's boarding house offered shelter from the wind, but little comfort. Calder had insisted on sleeping there rather than expose the widow to more danger. Jia Li had been given a proper room, but she'd slipped out after midnight to join him in the hayloft. Couldn't sleep, she'd said simply, settling into the straw with a blanket. Bad dreams, bad memories. They're worse than dreams because they're real. Now, as the Dakota wind howled through gaps in the barn walls, Calder found himself studying the girl who'd upended his carefully constructed isolation. She was curled tight against the cold, but her eyes were wide open, scanning the darkness beyond the barn doors. Tell me about your sister, he said quietly. Li Mei. She was 2 years older, but acted like she was 20. Always protecting me, always fighting for both of us. Jia Li's voice grew distant. She had a gift for languages. Could speak English, Spanish, even some German. Made her valuable to certain people. What happened to her? She tried to escape. Made it all the way to the countryside before they caught her. Jia Li's voice remained steady, but Calder could hear the pain beneath. They made an example of her. Made sure all the other girls knew what happened to runners. How did you survive? I watched. I learned. I remembered. She shifted in the straw, pulling the blanket tighter. Li Mei told me something before she died. About a white woman who helped Chinese girls. A woman who lived on a ranch outside a town called Whitestone Bluff. Calder's blood ran cold. What woman? She didn't know her name. But Li Mei said she was kind. Said she had dark hair and sad eyes, like she'd lost something precious. Jia Li looked at him directly. Sound familiar? Evelyn. The name came out as a whisper. I thought so. When I saw how the town treats you, how they talk about what she did, I knew. Her voice gentled. She saved my sister's life, Mr. Royce. For a while, anyway. Calder felt the world tilt around him. Evelyn had never mentioned helping Chinese girls, but then she'd been secretive about many things in the months before her death. The late-night trips to town, the hushed conversations, the bundles she'd been carrying that final morning. Why didn't she tell me? Probably trying to protect you. Men like Sheriff Bragg, they don't just go after the women who help. They go after the families, the husbands, anyone who might cause trouble. Jia Li's eyes reflected the moonlight. Your wife died because she was good. Don't let that goodness die with her. Before Calder could respond, a sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps. multiple pairs moving with the careful stealth of predators. Calder reached for his rifle, motioning for Jia Li to stay low. "How many?" she whispered. "5, maybe 6. Calder's voice was barely audible. "They're surrounding the barn." A voice called from the darkness outside Wade Kincaid, the saloon owner, who'd been bidding on Jia Li. His words were slurred with alcohol, but his intent was clear. "Royce, we know you're in there. Come on out." "What do you want, Kincaid?" "Just want to talk about your purchase today, about the trouble you're causing." "No trouble here. The girl's free." "Free?" Kincaid's laugh was ugly. "Ain't no such thing as free, Royce. Everything's got a price." "Then dig deeper in your pockets. Or maybe we just take what we want." Another voice, younger and meaner. "Like we should have done this afternoon." Calder could see shapes moving in the darkness, 6 men spread out around the barn. They had the building surrounded, but they were being cautious. Drunk, but not stupid. "You got one chance, Royce," Kincaid called. "Send out the girl and we'll let you walk away. No harm, no foul. And if I don't, then we come in after her, and you probably won't survive the conversation." Jia Li crawled closer to Calder, her eyes wide but determined. "There's a root cellar," she whispered. "Mrs. Callahan showed me. It connects to the main house." "How did you—" "I always look for escape routes. First thing Li Mei taught me." She gripped his arm. "I can get out through there, get help." "I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're buying me time." Her voice was fierce. "And you're giving me a chance to finish what your wife started." Before Calder could argue, the barn door exploded inward. Wade Kincaid stumbled through, shotgun in hand, whiskey courage fueling his rage. Behind him came 4 more men, their faces masked with bandanas. "Where is she?" Kincaid demanded, swinging the shotgun toward Calder. "Gone. Rode out an hour ago." "Liar, we've been watching this place all night." "Then you ain't very good at watching." Kincaid's face reddened. "Search the place. Turn over every bale of hay." As the men began ransacking the barn, Calder heard a soft creak behind him. The root cellar hatch was opening. He needed to keep their attention focused on him. "You know what you are, Kincaid," Calder said conversationally. "You're a coward. Always have been." "Shut up. Remember when Johnny Rebel caught you hiding in the church during the war? While better men were fighting and dying, you were cowering behind your mama's skirts." Kincaid's face went purple with rage. "You son of a bitch." The shotgun roared, but Calder was already moving. The blast shredded the air where he'd been standing, pellets embedding in the barn wall. Calder's rifle answered the bullet, taking Kincaid in the shoulder and spinning him around. "He's armed," one of the masked men shouted. "Spread out." Gunfire erupted in the confined space. Calder rolled behind a hay bale, bullets whining overhead. From the corner of his eye, he saw the root cellar hatch close silently. Jia Li was away, safely hidden in the underground tunnel. "Flush him out," Kincaid roared, clutching his wounded shoulder. "I want him alive." "Why alive?" one of the men asked. "Because dead men can't tell us where the girl went." A kerosene lantern shattered against the barn wall, its contents igniting the dry straw. Within seconds, flames were licking at the wooden supports. The barn was becoming a furnace. "Come on out, Royce," Kincaid called through the smoke. "Come out or cook." Calder felt the heat on his face, smelled the acrid smoke filling his lungs. The barn was old, tinder dry from the Dakota summer. It would be fully engulfed within minutes. He checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but maybe enough for what he had in mind. The flames were creating a wall of fire between him and the main door, but there was a side window boarded up and forgotten. "I'm coming out," he called, rising from behind the hay bale with his hands partially visible. "Don't shoot." The men tensed, weapons trained on him. Kincaid stepped forward, his face twisted with pain and rage. "Where's the girl?" "I told you, gone." "The gone where?" "North, toward the Canadian border." Kincaid's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." Am I? You want to stand here arguing while this place burns down around us? A burning beam crashed from the ceiling, sending sparks flying. The men instinctively stepped back, and in that moment of distraction, Calder made his move. He dove toward the side window, his shoulder hitting the boards with enough force to crack them. The old wood splintered, and he crashed through into the cool night air. "Stop him!" Kincaid screamed. But Calder was already running zigzagging through the shadows toward the tree line. Behind him, the barn erupted in flames, lighting up the night sky like a beacon. Rifle shots echoed through the darkness, bullets whining past his head. He reached the trees and dove behind a massive oak, his chest heaving. The barn was fully engulfed, now flames reaching toward the stars. Mrs. Callahan's boarding house was in danger. Sparks were already landing on the roof. "Fan out!" Kincaid's voice carried across the distance. Find him. Calder knew he couldn't outrun them forever. But he'd bought Jia Li time to escape, time to reach safety, time to tell the truth about what was happening in Whitestone Bluff. A twig snapped behind him. Calder spun, rifle raised, to find Marshal Langford emerging from the shadows, his federal badge catching the firelight. "Quite a show you're putting on, Royce." "Where's Jia Li?" "Safe. Mrs. Callahan's got her hidden in the church basement." Langford's eyes fixed on the burning barn. "Question is, what are we going to do about this?" "We? You think I'm going to let a bunch of drunken vigilantes burn down half the town?" Langford stepped into the open, his voice carrying federal authority. "Wade Kincaid, this is Marshal Langford. You and your men are under arrest." The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, the only sounds were the crackling flames and distant shouts of townspeople responding to the fire. "This is local business, Marshal," Kincaid called back. "Arson's a federal crime. Drop your weapons and step into the light." One by one, the men emerged from the shadows, their weapons lowered. The fight had gone out of them like air from a punctured balloon. "This ain't over," Kincaid snarled as Langford cuffed him. "You got no idea what you've started." "I've got a pretty good idea," Langford replied, "and I'm looking forward to finishing it." As the prisoners were led away, Calder watched the barn burn to the ground. The flames had spread to the stable, but the boarding house itself was safe. Mrs. Callahan stood in her doorway, her face etched with worry and determination. "The girl's asking for you," she called. "Says she's got something important to tell you." Calder found Jia Li in the church basement, sitting on a wooden crate with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "You're alive," she said simply. "Thanks to you in that root cellar." Calder sat down across from her. "You saved my life. Li Mei taught me about escape routes. Always have two ways out, she used to say." Jia Li's voice was soft, but her eyes were hard with purpose. "Mr. Royce, I need to tell you something. About your wife." "What about her?" "She wasn't just helping Chinese girls. She was building something bigger. Something that could destroy the whole operation." Jia Li reached into her dress and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "Li Mei gave me this before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should find the white woman with sad eyes and give it to her husband." Calder took the paper with trembling hands. It was a list of names written in Evelyn's careful script, but not the kind of list he'd expected. These weren't just names. They were locations, dates, and what looked like coded numbers. "What are these numbers?" "Map coordinates. Your wife was tracking the entire network, every safe house, every auction site, every transportation route." Jia Li's voice was matter of fact. She was going to expose the whole system from California to the Dakota Territory. Calder studied the list more carefully. Near the bottom, one entry stood out: WB Cemetery, ER. Final evidence, Grid 7A. What's Grid 7A? I don't know. But Li Mei said your wife hid something in the cemetery. Something that would bring down everyone involved in the trafficking ring. The paper crumpled slightly in Calder's grip. For 3 years, he'd thought Evelyn died randomly, senselessly. But she'd been systematically destroying a criminal empire. She'd been a warrior, and he'd never known it. "We have to find it," he said quietly. "Find whatever she hid, whatever evidence she thought was worth dying for." Calder stood, his mind racing. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." "I'm not going anywhere." Jia Li's voice was firm. "This is my fight too. Li Mei died for this, and I'm not going to let her death be meaningless." "You're 16 years old. I'm 16 years old, and I've survived things that would break grown men." She stood as well, her small frame somehow radiating strength. "I'm not a child anymore, Mr. Royce. I'm a weapon, and I know how to use myself." Before Calder could argue, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Marshal Langford appeared, his face grim. "We've got problems," he announced without preamble. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that wear federal badges and carry warrants from Washington." Langford sat heavily on a wooden crate. "I sent word to the territorial marshal yesterday asking for backup. Got a response this morning. And it seems there's been a complaint filed against me. Abuse of federal authority, interfering with local law enforcement, harboring a fugitive." Langford's smile was bitter. "Guess who signed the complaint?" "Sheriff Bragg. Bragg, Mayor Whitman, and Judge Morrison. They're calling for my immediate suspension." Langford pulled out a telegram. "But here's the interesting part, that the territorial marshal who's supposed to investigate me, he's riding down from Bismarck personally. Should be here tomorrow." "That's good, isn't it? A federal investigation? Would be if I trusted the territorial marshal. But according to my contacts, Marshal William Garrett has been awfully cooperative with local authorities lately. Awfully understanding of their concerns." Calder felt the walls closing in. "You think he's corrupt?" "I think he's either corrupt or he's been fed a very convincing story about what's happening here." Langford's voice was grim. "Either way, we're running out of time." "Then we move tonight," Jia Li said suddenly. "We find whatever Mrs. Royce hid, and we get it to someone who can't be bought." "Like who?" "Like the newspapers. Like the federal judges in Washington. Like the Chinese consulate in San Francisco." Her eyes blazed with determination. "Truth has a way of spreading, Mr. Royce, even when powerful people try to stop it." Langford nodded slowly. "She's right. We need to move fast before Garrett gets here and shuts down the investigation." "What about the cemetery?" Calder asked. "How do we find Grid 7A without attracting attention?" "We don't avoid attention," Jia Li replied. "We use it. Tomorrow's Sunday, people will be visiting graves, bringing flowers, paying respects. We blend in. And if we find whatever Evelyn hid, then we make copies, lots of them, and we spread them so far and wide that no one can suppress them all." It was a risky plan, but it was the only plan they had. As they prepared to leave the church basement, Calder felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. 3 years ago, he'd been a simple rancher with a loving wife. Now he was a reluctant revolutionary fighting to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. "Your wife would be proud," Langford said quietly. "She'd tell us we were fools. Maybe, but she'd stand with us anyway." The cemetery lay on a hill overlooking Whitestone Bluff, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the morning sun. Calder, Jia Li, and Langford approached separately, pretending to be casual visitors, paying respects to the dead. Calder knelt beside Evelyn's grave, his throat tight with emotion. The simple headstone read, "Evelyn Marie Royce, beloved wife and friend to all." Below that, in smaller letters, "She died as she lived, helping others. Grid 7A." Jia Li whispered, kneeling beside him with a bouquet of wildflowers. "Count 7 rows from the main gate, then 7 graves from the eastern fence." They moved carefully through the cemetery, counting rows and graves. Other visitors were scattered throughout the grounds, elderly couples tending family plots, children playing between headstones, a few solitary figures standing in quiet contemplation. "Here," Langford said quietly, stopping beside a weathered grave marker. "Samuel Morrison, 1823-1847. Beloved son and brother." Morrison. Calder frowned. Any relation to Judge Morrison? Could be. But look at this. Langford pointed to the base of the headstone where someone had carved a small symbol, 2 interlocking circles. This wasn't part of the original inscription. Jia Li knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing the symbol. "It's a code. Li Mei taught me about codes. The trafficking rings use them to mark safe houses, dangerous areas, pickup points. What does this one mean?" "Hidden treasure, or more literally, valuable items stored here." They looked around carefully, making sure they weren't being watched. The cemetery was peaceful, with only a few other visitors scattered among the graves. Calder began examining the ground around the headstone, looking for signs of disturbance. There. Jia Li pointed to a slight depression in the soil, barely visible, unless you knew what to look for. "Something's buried here." Using a small trowel they'd brought, Calder carefully excavated the spot. 6 inches down, his tool struck something hard. A few more minutes of careful digging revealed a metal box, similar to the one they'd found containing the photographs. "Should we open it here?" Langford asked. "Too risky. Let's take it back to the church." But as they prepared to leave, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them freeze. A column of riders was approaching the cemetery, federal marshals, their badges gleaming in the morning sun. At their head rode a man Calder didn't recognize, but whose bearing screamed authority. "Marshal Garrett," Langford said quietly. "He's early." The federal marshals spread out around the cemetery, effectively surrounding it. Garrett himself rode directly toward them, his pale eyes taking in every detail. "Marshal Langford," Garrett said, dismounting from his horse. "I understand you've been having some difficulties with local law enforcement." "Nothing I can't handle, sir." "I'm sure. But Washington is concerned about reports of federal overreach in territorial matters." Garrett's voice was calm, professional. "I'm here to conduct a thorough investigation." "Of course, sir. I'll cooperate fully." "I'm sure you will." Garrett's eyes shifted to Calder and Jia Li. "And these are local citizens. Mr. Royce here lost his wife a few years back. He's paying his respects." "My condolences, Mr. Royce. I understand your wife was involved in charitable work." The question was casual, but Calder could hear the steel beneath it. This man knew more than he was letting on. "She helped people," Calder replied carefully. "Anyone who needed help." "How admirable. And the young woman?" "She's under federal protection," Langford said quickly. "Witness to potential crimes." "What kind of crimes?" "Human trafficking, forced labor, corruption of public officials." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Serious charges. I hope you have substantial evidence." "We do. I look forward to reviewing it." Garrett remounted his horse. "In the meantime, I'll be conducting interviews with all relevant parties, starting with Sheriff Bragg." As the federal marshals rode away, Calder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Dakota wind. There had been something in Garrett's manner, something that suggested he wasn't the impartial investigator he claimed to be. "We need to move fast," Langford said quietly. "Something's not right about this." They returned to the church basement, where Calder carefully opened the metal box. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold, detailed records of the trafficking operation, financial ledgers showing payments to officials, and most damning of all, correspondence between various participants. "Look at this," Jia Li said, holding up a letter. "It's addressed to W.G. and signed by Sheriff Bragg." Calder read the letter aloud. "W.G. The situation is becoming unstable. The Royce woman has been asking too many questions and making too many contacts. Recommend permanent solution before she can cause further damage. Will require additional compensation for cleanup. CB, WG, Langford said slowly. William Garrett? The territorial marshal. The same territorial marshal who's here to investigate me. The same one who's been cooperating with local authorities. Langford's face was grim. We've been set up. What do you mean? I mean, Garrett isn't here to investigate corruption. He's here to cover it up. And we just walked right into his trap. As if summoned by their words, the sound of boots on stairs echoed through the church. Multiple pairs moving with military precision. Calder grabbed his rifle, but it was too late. Federal marshals poured into the basement, their weapons drawn. Drop your weapons, one of them shouted. You're all under arrest. On what charges? Langford demanded. Conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Interfering with federal law enforcement. Harboring a fugitive. The marshal's voice was cold professional. And in your case, Marshal Langford, treason. Treason. Conspiring with foreign nationals to undermine American territorial law. Accepting bribes from Chinese criminal organizations. Falsifying federal reports. The charges came like hammer blows. You're going to hang Langford? As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Calder realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just local corruption, it was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. And they just discovered evidence that could bring down everyone involved, which meant they were now the most dangerous people in the Dakota Territory. The federal jail in Whitestone Bluff was a stone building that had been constructed to house dangerous criminals awaiting trial. Now it held 3 people whose only crime was trying to expose the truth. Calder, Jia Li, and Langford sat in separate cells, their future uncertain. How long do you think we have? Calder asked through the bars. Not long, Langford replied. Garrett will want to tie up loose ends quickly. Can't afford to let us talk to anyone who might listen. What about the evidence, the documents we found? Probably already destroyed, along with any other proof of what's been happening here. Jia Li had been quiet since their arrest, but now she spoke up. Not all of it. What do you mean? I mean, I didn't just give you one list. I gave you a copy. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were fierce. The originals are somewhere else, somewhere safe. Where? With people who have even less to lose than we do. People who've been waiting for their chance to fight back. What people? The survivors. The families of the disappeared. The communities that have been destroyed by this trafficking ring. Jia Li's voice grew stronger. Your wife wasn't building a rescue operation, Mr. Royce. She was building an army. What kind of army? The kind that fights back when no one else will. The kind that speaks truth to power, even when power has all the guns. Before Calder could respond, the jail door opened. Marshal Garrett entered, flanked by 2 of his men. His face was calm, professional, but his eyes were cold as winter. Gentlemen, miss. He pulled up a chair and sat down facing their cells. I think it's time we had a frank conversation. About what Langford asked. About the future. About what happens to people who interfere with federal operations. Garrett's voice was conversational, but the threat was clear. You see, you've stumbled into something much bigger than a few missing Chinese girls. You've discovered a vital national security operation. National security? Calder's voice was incredulous. You call human trafficking national security. I call it resource management. The Chinese are flooding into California, taking jobs from American workers, corrupting American values. Someone has to regulate the flow, control the damage. Garrett's smile was cold. Think of it as selective immigration enforcement. You're selling children. I'm protecting American interests. The buyers are carefully screened, the transactions are recorded, the profits are used to fund other vital government operations. Garrett stood, beginning to pace. It's a perfect system. Efficient, profitable, and ultimately patriotic. And the girls who die? Acceptable losses. The price of maintaining American prosperity. Jia Li's voice cut through the air like a blade. You're a monster. I'm a realist. And you, young lady, are a problem that needs to be solved. What kind of solution? The permanent kind. You've seen too much, know too much. You're a threat to national security. Garrett's smile was predatory. Fortunately, Chinese girls disappear all the time. No one will miss you. They'll miss me, Calder said quietly. Will they, a hermit rancher with no family, no friends, no connections? I don't think so. Garrett's laugh was ugly. You'll disappear too, of course, along with our traitorous marshal here. A tragic accident, perhaps. Or maybe you'll simply vanish. And if we don't, then you'll die slowly, painfully, and your deaths will serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider interfering with federal operations. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Garrett was giving them a choice: cooperate and die quickly, or resist and die slowly. Either way, they were going to die. I have a counter-proposal, Jia Li said suddenly. Oh, let me tell you about the letters. What letters? The ones your operation has been sending to San Francisco. The ones that detail every transaction, every payment, every murder. Jia Li's voice was steady. The ones that are currently in the hands of the Chinese consulate, the federal prosecutor's office, and 3 different newspapers. Garrett's face went white. You're lying. Am I your own correspondence, Marshal? Every letter you wrote to Sheriff Bragg, every order you gave, every payment you authorized. Jia Li's smile was sharp as a blade. Did you really think my sister was just a frightened girl? She was a spy. And she was very, very good at her job. That's impossible. Is it? Check your files, Marshal. Check your records. See how many documents have gone missing over the past 2 years. Jia Li's eyes blazed with triumph. Li Mei was copying everything, photographing everything, sending everything to people who could use it. Even if that's true, it doesn't matter. Those people can't touch me. I'm a federal marshal. You're a criminal, and criminals get punished. By who I am the law in this territory. No, said a new voice from the jail entrance. I am. They turned to see a figure in a long coat standing in the doorway. As he stepped into the light, Calder could see the federal badge on his chest, but this wasn't one of Garrett's men. This was someone else entirely. Federal Judge Harrison, the man announced. I'm here to conduct an investigation into allegations of corruption, human trafficking, and abuse of federal authority. Garrett's face cycled through shock, fear, and rage. Judge Harrison, how did I know? Because I've been receiving very interesting correspondence from this territory, letters, photographs, documents, all detailing a criminal conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of territorial law enforcement. Those documents are classified. Those documents are evidence. Evidence of your crimes, Marshal Garrett. Judge Harrison's voice was cold as winter. Evidence that's been reviewed by a federal grand jury in Washington. Evidence that's resulted in warrants for your arrest. You can't prove anything. Can't I? We have your correspondence with Sheriff Bragg. We have financial records showing payments to corrupt officials. We have witness testimony from dozens of victims. Judge Harrison smiled. And we have the most damning evidence of all, the personal journal of Evelyn Royce detailing every aspect of your operation. That's impossible. The journal was destroyed. The journal you found was a copy. The original has been in federal custody for 2 years, ever since Mrs. Royce mailed it to my office, along with a letter explaining the situation. Judge Harrison's eyes were hard as stone. She knew she was going to die, Marshal, and she made sure her death would have meaning. The silence that followed was deafening. Garrett stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and desperation. His criminal empire was crumbling around him, and he knew it. "You're under arrest, Marshal." Judge Harrison continued. "You and every member of your organization. The United States government does not tolerate treason." "And this is a mistake," Garrett said desperately. "You don't understand the bigger picture. I understand perfectly. You're a criminal who's been using federal authority to commit heinous crimes, and you're going to hang for it." As federal marshals, real ones this time, moved to arrest Garrett, Calder felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for justice, but for the future. For a world where people like Evelyn and Lee May didn't have to die to expose the truth. The cell doors opened, and they were free. But freedom, Calder realized, was just the beginning. The real work, rebuilding lives, healing communities, creating a world where such horrors couldn't happen again, was just starting. "What happens now?" he asked Judge Harrison. Now we rebuild. We make sure this never happens again. We create a legacy that honors the people who died fighting for justice. And the survivors, they get to live. Really live, not just survive. Judge Harrison's voice was gentle. They get to be free. As they walked out of the jail into the Dakota sunlight, Calder felt Evelyn's presence beside him. Not as a ghost or a spirit, but as a promise. A promise that good people would continue to fight evil no matter the cost. A promise that justice, while sometimes delayed, would eventually prevail. "What will you do now?" Jia Li asked. "I don't know. The ranch feels empty without her." "Then fill it with something else. Something that would make her proud." Calder looked at the young woman who'd survived so much, who'd fought so hard, who'd helped bring down a criminal empire. She was right. The ranch didn't have to be a monument to grief. It could be something else entirely. "A school," he said suddenly. "A place where children can learn, where families can heal. Where people like you can teach others about survival, about strength, about never giving up." The Evelyn Royce Memorial School. Something like that. Jia Li smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "I think she'd like that." As they walked through the streets of Whitestone Bluff, Calder noticed something different. People were looking at them with respect, not suspicion. Store owners were nodding and greeting. Children were playing in the streets without fear. The truth had set them free, all of them. 2 years later, the Evelyn Royce Memorial School stood where Calder's ranch house had once been. The building was simple, but solid, built with donations from across the territory, and the labor of those who'd been freed from Garrett's trafficking ring. Calder stood in the doorway, watching as children of all backgrounds filled the classrooms. Chinese girls sat beside Mexican boys, their voices raised in recitation. Former slaves learned to read alongside the children of their former oppressors. The sounds of a dozen languages mixed in the hallways, creating a symphony of hope. "Hard to believe it's been 2 years," said a voice behind him. Calder turned to see Marshal Langford approaching, his federal badge replaced by a simple teacher's vest. He'd resigned from law enforcement after Garrett's trial, choosing instead to educate the next generation about justice and equality. "Some days it feels like yesterday," Calder replied. "Other days it feels like a lifetime." "Any regrets?" "About the school, no. About the cost." Calder's voice trailed off. "Sometimes I wonder if there might have been another way. There's always another way, but there's rarely a better one." Langford's voice was steady. "What we did here changed things, not just for us, but for people across the country." "How so?" "Garrett's trial exposed trafficking rings in 6 territories. His testimony brought down corrupt officials from California to Washington. His conviction sent a message that this kind of evil won't be tolerated." Langford smiled. "Your wife's death started something, Calder. a movement that's still growing. They were interrupted by the sound of laughter from one of the classrooms. Through the window, they could see Jia Li teaching a group of young girls how to read. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, her intelligence and determination making her a natural teacher. "She's good with them," Langford observed. "She's good with everyone. She understands what it means to survive, to overcome, to build something better from the ashes of the old." "What about her future? Has she decided what she wants to do?" "She's talking about law school. Says she wants to be a federal prosecutor to continue the fight against human trafficking." Calder's voice was proud. "She'd be good at it. And you? What about your future?" "This is my future," Calder said, gesturing to the school. "This is what Evelyn would have wanted. A place where children can learn, where families can heal, where the next generation can build a better world." As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, a wagon appeared on the horizon. As it drew closer, Calder could see that it carried a family, a man, a woman, and 2 young children who looked lost and frightened. "More refugees?" Langford asked. "Looks like it." Calder straightened, preparing to greet the newcomers. "Word keeps spreading. People know they can find safety here." The wagon pulled to a stop in front of the school. The man who climbed down was travel-worn and wary, his eyes darting around the yard as if expecting trouble. The woman held the children close, her face etched with the kind of fear that came from too much loss. "You the folks who run this place?" the man asked, his accent marking him as from the deep south. "We are," Calder replied. "What can we do for you?" "Name's Thomas Freeman. This here's my wife Sarah and our children Mary and John." He paused, struggling with the words. "We heard tell you take in folks who need help, folks who don't have nowhere else to go." "That's right. What's your situation?" We were slaves, down in Mississippi. Got our freedom after the war, but..." He trailed off, looking around nervously. "Let's just say some folks down there don't take kindly to free colored people trying to make their own way." Calder understood immediately. The Freeman family were former slaves, probably from the Delta region, heading north in search of opportunity and safety. The kind of people who'd faced the same brutal dehumanization that had destroyed so many immigrant families. "You're safe here," Calder said simply. "All of you." "What's it gonna cost us?" Sarah Freeman asked, her voice tight with suspicion, born of hard experience. "Nothing you can't afford," Calder replied. "The cost here isn't money. It's helping the next family that shows up, passing on what you receive, making sure the cycle of kindness continues. And if we can't pay that cost, then you stay anyway, because that's what decent people do for each other." The youngest child, Mary, had been staring at the school with wide eyes. Now she tugged on her mother's dress. "Mama, look at all the children. They're all different colors, but they're playing together." "Yes, baby, they are. Can I play with them?" "We'll see, Mary, we'll see." "Of course you can," Jia Li said, appearing as if from nowhere. "We've got children from all over the world here. Chinese, Mexican, German, Irish, African. All learning together, all growing together. All free together," Calder added. The word hung in the air, like a benediction. Free. It was such a simple word, but it carried the weight of every dream, every hope, every sacrifice that had been made in the name of human dignity. "Free," Thomas Freeman repeated, tasting the word. "Lord, that's a beautiful sound." "It's a beautiful thing," Calder agreed. "And it's worth fighting for." As the Freeman family was welcomed into the school community, Calder felt the familiar warmth of purpose filling his chest. This was what Evelyn had died for. This was what Li Mei had sacrificed herself to protect. Not just the freedom of individuals, but the freedom of entire communities to grow and thrive together. "You know what the best part is?" Jia Li said, watching as Mary Freeman was instantly absorbed into a group of playing children. What's that? In 20 years, these children will be adults. They'll remember what they learned here. About tolerance, about justice, about the value of every human life. She smiled. They'll teach their children, and their children will teach theirs. And someday, maybe we'll have a world where no one has to fight for the right to be free. You really believe that's possible? I believe it's inevitable. Evil makes a lot of noise, but goodness is patient and persistent. And in the end, persistence always wins. As the sun set over the Evelyn Royce Memorial School, Calder walked to the small cemetery behind the main building. 2 graves stood side by side, one marked Evelyn Royce, beloved wife and champion of justice. The other marked Li Mei, brave sister and freedom fighter. He knelt between the graves, placing fresh wildflowers on each. The Dakota wind carried the sounds of children's laughter, adult conversation, and the everyday business of a community learning to live together in harmony. We did it, he said quietly. We built something that will last, something that honors what you both died for. The wind seemed to whisper a response, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of tomorrow. And in that whisper, Calder heard the voices of all those who'd fought for freedom, not just in Whitestone Bluff, but across the world, across history, across the endless human struggle for dignity and justice. The battle was won. The war continued. But the legacy of love would endure, passed from generation to generation, ensuring that the light of freedom would never be extinguished. As Calder rose to his feet and walked back toward the school, he felt at peace for the first time in years. The future was uncertain, but it was bright with possibility. And in the growing darkness, lit by the windows of the school where children of all nations learned to read and write and dream, that future was being written one lesson at a time, one child at a time, one act of kindness at a time. It was a beautiful future, a free future, a future worth every sacrifice that had been made to secure it. The story was ended. The legacy lived on.